And hi everyone. Welcome to the first of what might become a series down the road. It's a number of people had asked me to look into the books of Carlos Castaneda, and it was something that I had been interested in doing for a while. Of course, I've read them all and did many of the things that the book suggested and had many of the experiences that were actually in the books. And I thought rather than try to go through, if I'm going to share Castaneda things with you, rather than try to go through and share a topic at a time, I thought it might make more sense to go through it book by book. And to me, the first book that anyone should use to really explore Carlos Castaneda's work is his third book, Journey to Ixtlan. As I've said many times, I really dislike the first book. It's just there's just something very strange about it. It's all focused on the drug experience. It's and it's pretty obvious that he was presenting more than he really knew. But by the time he wrote his second book, A Separate Reality, the writing had changed, and it means that the person had changed. Something about Castaneda was different. By the time he writes the third book, he's now getting rid of the drug experience altogether, and in fact is rid of it for the rest of his writing, and is trying to discuss how to reach these areas and reach these topics and these understandings through personal work and through your own exercises, not through the use of some sort of chemical substance, some sort of plant. So it becomes a very big shift, and I think if you read Journey to Ixtlan first, it becomes much easier to go back to the other books if you want to and dig into what's there. Again, I'm not saying that Castaneda himself was a man who could live the things that he wrote. It's clearly not true. He was quite the strange dude and had a very strange group that he had put together in his, I guess almost you would call it, compound in downtown Los Angeles. You can get into all of that story if you want to. The point I'm just going to look at is the books. Do the books themselves provide useful information for those of us on a journey to inner understanding? And I think the answer is yes. So just because the fact that Castaneda the writer and Castaneda the living person were not one and the same and were in fact quite different, I don't think diminishes the work in the books. Just don't put Castaneda on a pedestal, though, that he was the person in the book. He himself is a literary character, right? The Carlos Castaneda in the Castaneda novels is as much a literary character as any other literary characters. It's based on himself, but it's not really himself. He's writing a story. He's writing a novel. And as long as we have that, and as long as you understand that, you can tackle the books. So Journey to Ixtlan, and what I'm going to do is in this case, each chapter has a specific title, has a specific topic actually that it relates to. So it's a very unique book out of the whole series because of that. So I'm just going to go through it chapter by chapter. Now, I haven't read the book in a long time. I haven't actually read Journey to Ixtlan. I've looked through it the last couple of days, like sort of just skim read it again just to remember what all the chapters were for. So I'm going to forget some things because, like I say, I didn't like reread the whole book last night. I just overlooked it. And a lot of the chapters I'm just going to skim over with a one word or a one sentence answer because it doesn't require much more. Certain other chapters for me feels like it needs a little bit more detail. And I'm going to just provide an overview of some of the key subjects that are here. And if you want to go back and read the book and dig into it yourself, well, that's your choice. So let's begin. It begins with an introduction. And the introduction is a combination of explaining what's called stopping the world, which is really what this book sort of is about, this concept of stopping the world. And when you talk about stopping the world, you might also call it interrupting the structures of the way our person and our mind has come to believe reality is. That's really what it is. So stopping the world is really stopping the mind, and stopping the mind means to stop the gigantic list of assumptions and ideas and concepts we have been given that the world is a certain way, the world does this, the world behaves this way, it has these certain laws, and that's the way it is. As opposed to allowing all that to stop, not to replace it with something else originally, but just to stop that continuous flow, you might say, so that something else can show itself. And it was very clear that right away, on at least in my book, page 8 and 9, he's already going into the key elements that this idea of the world is just a description. And it's a description of the world that's pounded into you from the moment you're born, right? Every child is getting pounded by those around. It's a really good word, pounded, in order to perceive the world as everybody else does. There's a certain membership, you might say. Reality is the way that it is, and all of us, 99.9% of the population, believe certain elements and certain things of reality. Now, of course, we'll go into different sections and different, but no one will argue when we're sitting on a chair that we're sitting on a chair. No one would argue if we're at the beach that we're at the beach. No one would argue if a car goes by that it's a car. I mean, at the base level, there is an unbelievable agreement with the world, with the reality we experience. The interpretation of that reality and what it means and what it doesn't mean, how it relates to our experience, okay, that becomes unique to the person, but we don't have big discussions, if a car just drove by us or not. One says car, one says giraffe, one says spaceship, one says nothing, one says the wind. We don't have that. We don't have to have it. Everyone says car. And he's saying that there's a point where a young child gives in to all of this conditioning and starts agreeing with the world the way the adults and the other teachers present us to. From that moment on, the child is a member. He knows the description of the world, and his membership becomes full-fledged, I suppose, when he is capable of making all the proper perceptual interpretations which, by conforming to that description, validate it. For Don Juan, then, the reality of our day-to-day life consists of an endless flow of perceptual interpretations which we, the individuals who share a specific membership, have learned to make in common. So this is a really, really important point, that to move past this reality, you have to start seeing that the world you know is just an assumption. It's just a description. And to move past it, you have to see there are other descriptions of the world. There are other realities. There are other ways of perceiving this reality. And that is what, in a sense, this book is attempting to present. Ways to stop the continuous inner flow and inner dialogue of information that tells us the world is the way that it is. So the introduction, which is actually quite good, gives an overview of what this book is really going to be presenting. It takes us then to chapter 1, which is called Reaffirmations from the World Around Us. And it's quite simply a chapter that's kind of saying that the world is responding to us. That's a simple way of saying it, but it's much more. It's a little more complex than that, and there's, it is an introductory chapter, so there's not a lot of depth in it that I remember. But it's this idea that the world will respond and give us clues, or is giving us clues all the time, and it's just an idea of are we alert to it. And it's this idea also of dropping anything we don't want in our life, that we can eliminate anything from our life immediately. This idea of so that's really what chapter 1 is about. Chapter 2 is erasing personal history. And erasing personal history becomes a thing that tends to get confused in Castaneda's writings because it tends to be presented as if you have to become secretive and hide your past and hide who you are and hide what you're doing and not talk about yourself and move away from your family and live alone in the woods or something. And I mean that's just an extreme version of it. But you're not really while the idea is to say as little as possible to others. It's not to hide from people or not talk about yourself. Really, the erasing personal history is really about erasing the history you have to yourself, not to others. I mean, others will reflect that back to you. But as long as you keep believing you are the way you are, as long as you keep believing you're smart or stupid or rich or poor or lucky or unlucky, it doesn't matter. It's very hard to have reality give you a different experience than what you will continually believe about yourself. So really what erasing personal history is a series of work to erase the history of who you thought you were to yourself, that you have always been this way, so you have to always be that way going forward. That's the simplest way I can describe what erasing personal history really is. Now, of course, the more you say to others, of course, the more you reaffirm yourself in others' eyes, the more you are linking that perception of yourself, and the harder it is to be something else around others. That's why when people begin a real journey of transformation and they really start changing, trips to see their parents, trips to see their closest relatives, trips to see or spending time with your oldest friends are going to hurt you in that stage, because they've known you for a long, long time in a particular way, in a particular box. And as soon as you start acting outside the box, that's going to become very upsetting to them. And they are going to do their best to force you back into the box of the known. So it's why it can be good if you are going through some major transformations and you really are trying to change yourself, to step back from the people who know you the most for a while, not forever. You're not supposed to hide and run away. That's a major mistake that turns organizations into cults where you're not allowed to see your family and your people and the people you knew before. No, it's not what it's about. It's about giving yourself the space to allow the change and the transformation to happen, so that when you meet the people who won't like the transformation the most, i.e. the people who are closest to you, you will have had enough strength and solidity in the new persona that you won't be swayed as easy to just go back to the way you always were. So that's erasing personal history. Chapter 3 is losing self-importance, which is, we can just nullify that as having it so that the world is equal to you, that the things you want in your life, well, the world should have it too, that you should be thinking about the plants and animals and the flowers and the rocks as much as you think of yourself and your closest family members. I'm simplifying that, but that's because I want to get through some of the chapters can be easy. I mean, read the chapter, but the basis of some of the chapters is generally a 1 or 2 sentence description. Same with number 4, which is using death as an advisor, which is talked about a lot, this idea of when you truly know that you're a being that's going to die, then it forces you into having that perspective and knowing that you don't know how much time you have left. You don't know whether you don't know what your time frame is. And this links to chapter 9, actually, which is called The Last Battle on Earth. So I might as well do both of these together because it's pretty much the same message. Chapter 9, The Last Battle on Earth, same thing. You have to do everything as if it's your last act. You have to act as if you're going to die in an hour. Like if you were going to die in an hour or 3 hours or 5 hours and you knew that, what would you do? And I don't mean like, oh, well, I've always wanted to paint this painting, so, okay, well, maybe, yeah, but there's still things you're going to have to do. You're still going to have to cook your lunch. The point is don't cook your lunch like a guy who thinks they're going to die in 40 years. Cook your lunch as if you're a person who's cooking their last lunch and it's the last one you're ever going to eat. Your attention and your capacity for clarity will be expanded beyond your belief. There's all these exercises in these books, be in the now, be present, have awareness, mindfulness, all this other crap. You don't need to. The only thing you need to do for that is just recognize whatever you're doing could be the last act you do on Earth. When I fell in the canyon, I didn't think that simple walk in the woods was going to be potentially the last thing I ever did in my life, or sitting on the rocks beside the river was truly going to be the last thing I did before falling in and dying. I mean, I couldn't. You wouldn't think that way, but if you think that, once you realize that the next possible thing could actually bring about your death, your awareness is going to expand greatly right now. So all of these things, all of these books, all of these teachers that have made a whole lot of money off people with ideas and concepts and really a whole lot of bullshit, basically, it's just taken away with death awareness. And it causes you to have a depth of perception in what you're doing and to take action. Simple. Chapter 5 is about assuming responsibility. And if we narrow that down specifically, simply, that's just, again, we're talking about commitment. We're talking about making a commitment, and then when you make the commitment, you follow through on it, and you assume the consequences, good or bad, for having made the commitment and doing it. And it's accepting then, once you've made a decision and you go forward with it, things will happen because of it. And as such, if you don't like the actions of a decision that you've made, then it's telling you you need to be better in your decision-making process. You need to be better in the moments of decision to learn how to gain the right clarity, so that even if the decision you to make turns out to be poor, or not poor, that's not the wrong word. When you make decisions with clarity, even if the decision turns out to be something you don't like, and you start having experiences that are not what you really wanted, the point is, though, you won't have regrets because you knew that was the decision, that was the right decision to make at the time. Even though the other way now might look like an interesting choice, and gee, well, it would have been interesting if I turned left instead of right, you knew, though, you were clear in the moment, and the clear decision in the moment, for whatever reason, was to turn right. So the difficulty and the challenges are actually now part of your experience, not some mistake, not some error that you made. It's just the experience, for some reason, of the way the universe is directing you, needs to be challenging. It's a completely different way of viewing your life as things get hard, when you feel that you can't track it back to a mistake you made. So you start living your life without regrets then. You start being able to live your life with, because as soon as you make decisions or do things when you're not clear, or do something, oh, that was just, why would I do that? That was just so dumb, That instead of saying, yeah, I can see totally why that looked like the thing to do in the moment. That was the right thing to be doing. And I would do it again. I would go back and I would still make that choice, because I know on one level it's not wrong, just because my experiences were difficult. But the more you tend to have a clarity when you're making key decisions, and the more you stick to your commitments, generally things tend to turn out a little bit smoother than more difficult. Number 6 is linking to what I just talked about with the last 2 chapters, and this is becoming a hunter, which is really about awareness and attention. And again, it's just knowing what you're doing in any moment. When I was going through the greatest amount of attention work in my life, I don't have that kind of attention now, but when I did, one of the things I didn't want to make was noise. I didn't like, when I walked in my house, I didn't like to make noise. If I put a coffee cup, so I have a cup, so I'm going to just put the cup down now, how I might put a cup down now. You might have heard it, right? You can hear the cup go down. But when I was in my attention phase, so everything I was doing at attention, I put my cup down like this. It was very rare, it was very quiet. You could almost never hear it. You had to be right beside it to hear the cup being placed. I'll try to do it again, right on the table. I haven't done this for a while, but with just attention, I would just be very quiet. One roommate I had a long time ago called me the mouse because I could be home and she would never know I was actually at home because I never made any noise. And that's an idea of this being a hunter, which is having tremendous awareness. And of course, the chapter will be talking about being a hunter. You're not hunting an animal or something like that, even though you can use that as a training. What you're hunting is yourself. You're hunting your mind. What you're hunting for is how your mind operates, how the structures of the mind operate, what are the patterns that the mind uses or doesn't use, and you're breaking that down by watching yourself and having such incredible attention on what you're doing that you can unravel your entire mind. Number 7 is being inaccessible, which means being in the world but using it only as much as you need. You know, if you need 10 pieces of firewood, don't go chop down 6 trees. You know what you need and take only what you need and be thankful for that. If you need 8 potatoes for dinner, don't go out and pull up 40 potatoes from the ground and just have them sitting there for nothing. You need 8. Take the 8 that you need and move on. It's about using the world. It's about touching the world as much as is needed for what you actually need, showing respect for it, and then because of that, you won't cling. Once you get worried, once you get anxious, once you get concerned by not having the kind of awareness and death as an advisor and assuming responsibility, now you look for something to make you safe, and you'll cling to it. And that clinging will just deplete your energy. It doesn't matter whether it's a person, the world, a concept, a job, a location, or whatever. As long as you choose something, in order, in a sense, like as a protection tool or as a smothering tool for yourself or for them, you just drain yourself. That's what that chapter is about. Number 8 is called Disrupting the Routines of Life. And it's a chapter that begins the topic of not doing. Not doing, which is part of the way of hunting your mind, is hunting all the actions that you take. Because we live one giant robotic pattern of life. And as you begin to see that your life is just everything you do is a pattern. You sit the same way, you drink the same thing in the morning, you brush your teeth the same way, you put your shoes on the same way, you go for the same walk, you know, everything is the same. And all you have to do, like say for example, there's a walk I take quite often where I just walk to a gate that's down here. It's a long enough walk that's just a short little, enough to get me moving. And then I walk back. And now when I talk about it, I've been doing the same walk quite often, many days in a row. All I'd have to do is stop once somewhere on there and like jump to my left once, or spin around, or just stand still and look at a tree or wave my arms. Anything, one little thing differently on the walk has disrupted the pattern of the walk. It's now not exactly the same as the walk I always do. And that's what the concept of at the beginning of what not doing is about. It is about disrupting your patterns, and I write about it in Falling for Truth, and I think I talked about it in a video somewhere on here. Deeper and deeper stages of not doing. How you can really go into depth with this practice, and I did not doing for 2 or 3 years, really intense stuff, and gave some suggestions to a few other people who did it. One thing that's interesting that I didn't find in this book, now that I think about it, is the recapitulation. It's a practice that Castaneda writes a number of times in his books. Of course, I talk about it a lot. It was a very important process, which is the life review, reviewing your entire life experience. But I don't think it made it in. I don't think it's in Journey to Ixtlan. It might not be until the next book, Tales of Power, that the concept even turns up. So it's interesting that the recapitulation wasn't part of Castaneda's, what's the English word, lexicon of knowledge that he was presenting. Lexicon just means a giant amount of information, or Number 10, being accessible to power. And this is it's actually a fairly long chapter in the book and a fairly detailed chapter compared to the others. And it's a chapter that really goes into a lot of dreaming. The concept of dreaming, which is ways of seeking power in your night dreams and becoming aware that your dreams at night are just as real as reality and therefore need to be understood and examined and focused on just as you would real life. They also need to be semi-ignored and not paid attention to just like you do in real life. And this idea, it talks about this idea of power and what it is and how it's a personal thing and what power means and how you gain it, and then how you work with your dreams, which in his case was trying to start having attention in your dreams. So the same way you're working to have attention in your day-to-day life, you want to start having the same attention in your dreams so that you can not just remember them clearly, you can consciously act in your dreams rather than just be an unattentive actor as we normally are. His suggestion was looking at your hands. What it really means is it's a simple little action that you're going to do in your daily life, in your day-to-day life. What was mine? I think mine was it looking at a clock when I did this? Or when I flicked the light switch? I don't remember what it was. It might have been looking at a clock. But every time I looked at a clock or checked the time, what I did was ask myself, am I dreaming now? And I would take 10 seconds and I would just look around and try to test, is this my normal reality or am I dreaming? Okay, normal reality, because I just looked at my clock. Normal reality, okay, go back. And if I happen to look at a clock again, am I dreaming right now? It's 5 seconds. And for 100 times in a row when you do this, of course you're going to say, normal reality, okay. But one time, you're going to look at the clock somewhere, you're going to check the time somehow, and something's going to be really, really off in your reality. Or you're not even going to be in whatever city you live in. You're somewhere else or some other time, and you're going to realize, wait a minute. This is not normal reality. I think I might be dreaming. And as soon as you can get that perception in your mind, all of a sudden you open the doorway to walk into what Castaneda calls dreaming. So he discusses that in Chapter 10. Chapter 11 is something called the mood of a warrior. And again, it's more about dreaming, and it's beginning to talk about this idea that once you start working with your night dreams, you'll be noticing that what you call day-to-day reality is appearing quite a lot in your dreams. But then you'll start to notice that your dreams start appearing in day-to-day reality, and that there becomes this crossover where you don't know which one is affecting the other, and you begin to start to see that both are equally real and equally not real. When you start to see that your dream is just as real as reality and reality is just as unreal as the dream, you're walking into this place called the mood of a warrior, where you're beginning to back away again from the description of the world, where the world is one way, dreams are another way, ideas are something else, thoughts are this, feelings are this. Now all of a sudden everything gets a question mark and is open for inspection. Number 12 was hunting power. And again, I just skimmed the chapter, but I know there were parts in there about finding spots in nature that have a certain energy or a certain way of elevating you. And it's really a chapter about just, again, linking to number 11, learning how to see beyond the normal. As you begin to see the world as more dreamlike, as less solid, you'll begin to be more aware of and allowing reality to be different. You're not at this point learning how to control it or change it or fix it. You're just noticing that reality doesn't behave the way you've always wanted to. Number 13 is the warrior's last stand, and this is a chapter about a key place of power, something called the dance of death, and the idea that we have this one place on earth that is special to us, that is this linking location, and it may seem just simple. I have one like that. There's a particular place that I knew from my past that whenever I journey, particularly if I'm journeying for somebody else to get information or help for someone else, I always start at this one particular place. It's a place where I feel in the dream state, grounded and focused, and okay, I can kind of, and by starting there, it gives me a springboard to wherever I'm going to go next. If I try to do it without going to this place, um, the journey isn't as good. And we all have a place like this in the physical. And if it's possible, if you can go to this place many times in a regular or normal material form, you'll be building up more and more energy, more and more power, more and more connection with it, that you'll be able to use it more and more when you're not there. But it also means that if you're going to start what you might call using the spot, then you also have to treat the spot with respect, and it means you kind of have to look after it a bit. So the spot I used to go there and I would clean it up a lot. I would get some garbage and things from other people who would be there, and I would go and I'd bring bags sometimes and clean it and make sure that the spot, whenever I left the spot, it was as clean and pristine as I could possibly leave it. That it was my way of saying thank you by trying to do what little I could for the spot, for given how much it was given me. The chapter 14, we're getting close to the end of this. Chapter 14 is called The Gate of Power, and it's describing a way of running, I think, in the night. I have to remember what it was, but it's also chapter's also discussing negative forces and their impact on it, and ways that we can counteract this force. It's just things that he begins to discuss in much later books about things he calls the parasite and things he calls the non-human mind, and etc., etc. He's just lightly touching on it, like just barely touching on it here in this chapter, Gate of Power. But it's here and it's beginning this process. Number 15 is Not Doing, and that's expanding that other chapter about disrupting the routines of life. And now in this chapter, I think Castaneda was asked to look at the shadow between two rocks and see how the shadow acts like a glue between the one rock and the other rock, that it's actually the smaller rock is actually glued to the other rock by the shadow. And it takes you into the technique of gazing, which is something I talked about, and particularly the use of shadow gazing, which is a bit more of an advanced practice. But it's still the idea of, when we look at something, we look at a tree or a rock, we don't spend our time staring at the shadow of the tree or a rock. So it's this idea again of the shadow of the tree is telling you as much about the tree as the tree is. It's just telling you the reversal almost, just like the shadow side. It's telling you the reversal of the opposite of what you normally see on the light side. Both are equal and both should be examined. I'm simplifying the chapter. It's a good chapter. I highly recommend it. When we go through the next 5 chapters, I'm going to go through them very quickly because they're all kind of talking about the same thing, and they're kind of like stories and experiences, so I don't want to block in the way too much. But one is called The Ring of Power, and it's really about, again, this idea that the world is the world because we sort of have a ring, what we call a ring of power, this membership. Once we become a member, it's like we get a ring symbolically, and we wear this ring, and this magic ring makes sure that we see the world a particular way. But if you encounter someone that has a different ring, that doesn't use this ring of power, they can manipulate not only their own reality but your reality. They can manipulate what's going on, and this is what shamans and great healers and whatnot are doing. They have a different way of having understood reality in themselves, so they're operating with a different ring. We have this thing, chapter 17, called A Worthy Opponent, and it's all these odd interactions that Castaneda has with this woman called La Catalina. And there's a couple of things that it's a combination of this, of like almost like something that's going to test you, something that's going to force you out of your normal way of thinking things and seeing things differently by a testing figure. It's also lightly touching this idea of the chapter of sexuality, or being what happens once you feel a sexual attraction to another person, what happens energetically. And it's one of the things I really thought about, that it's a combination of that very attractive people must have some challenges in the course of their life, because when you think of a person, just if you think of somebody in general, if I think of a friend of mine back say back in Canada, a good friend of mine. There is a slight bit of energy that's starting to move there automatically. If I'm thinking about them, then my attention is going to them. There's an energy moving. You know, sometimes I had a female friend who lived in a different city than I did, and she never had to call me long. She never called me long distance because she would just think of me, and within 24 hours I would always call her. When she felt like she wanted to talk to me, she would just sit for 5 minutes and think about me, and then lo and behold, in a few hours or the next morning, I would just, hey, I was just thinking about you, wondering how you're doing. And so this idea of every time we think of another person, there's a slight energetic movement that affects us and the person themselves. So if somebody is who is considered very attractive, who people are thinking about a lot, the amount of energy that has to be that person is being affected by is got to be more than we think. And on one hand, it can energize the person, because if the thoughts are really good about the person, you might say, well, they might be getting energy might be going to them, so they might be actually drawing energy. In other cases, if people are constantly fantasizing about them or upset about them because they're dating someone else and not them, all of a sudden this energy by so many people is thrown at them, and it can actually create a very disturbed energy. You know, it's something similar where somebody on TV or somebody that they see as a celebrity and people think about and focus on and are reading about and have in their minds, there's an energy movement to and from them that's not always necessarily positive. So from that perspective, it's also a reminder of how many people are thinking about you, how many people are contemplating you in their mind, how many people are you contemplating on a day-to-day basis, how many people are in your mind and thinking of, knowing that you've got this, and particularly someone you feel an attraction to. If it's in your mind, there is a slight energetic tug that's affecting you and them. And if it's somebody you really like, it might be better not to do that at all, because you could be affecting them in a negative way without even knowing that you're doing that, just energetically. So I think that's some of the things that are in this chapter on a worthy opponent. The Sorcerer's Ring of Power begins another story of, again, just kind of altering reality when you have what they call a ring that is different from the normal ring, the Sorcerer's Ring, as opposed to the ring of normal description. 19 is Stopping the World, which is a story of Castaneda having the experience of Don Juan and Don Gennaro, of seeing reality in a completely different way. In this one, where he has an experience with a coyote that he believes talks and has a conversation with him, which Don Juan is saying it did and it didn't, and you have to see things in a completely different way. That leads us to chapter 20, Journey to Ixtlan, which is, for me, the best chapter in the book. It is outstanding, and it's usually missed by a lot of people. They don't really get what this chapter is about. So it was this chapter that helped me see, along with a chapter in the book previous to this, Separate Reality, that Castaneda really did know something about the nature of reality. And if we simplify the Journey to Ixtlan, it's the realization that the human world is a dream world. That the people here are phantoms, are not real, are actors in a movie. And this is a very important thing, because after he tells the whole story, there's the story where he's realizing none of the people are real, and that's when he asked them. He called them phantoms. All these people he kept seeing kind of phantoms, right? He kept finding these phantoms who kept trying to trick him and make him come with him, trick him into, in a sense, returning back to the world of the description. When now in this story, Don Gennaro has spun himself, what he calls through his battle with his ally, but spun himself into a new description of reality, seeing reality completely different, and the only way to keep that description is to not get drawn back in. And then this conversation in the book happens. This is page 311 for me. Well, were these phantoms allies, Don Gennaro, I asked. No, they were people. People, but you said they were phantoms. I said that they were no longer real. after my encounter with the ally, nothing was real anymore. So it's a real powerful experience. And this is a chapter I highly, even if you don't want to read the rest of the book, just read the chapter. And this idea that now as you walk your journey, you're kind of always going home. And that's the idea. Gennaro was trying to walk to this place that he called Ixtlan, which was home. He was trying to find home, and then he starts to realize he'll never get home. He'll almost always get there, but he'll never make it. And then they read a passage of a poem by Juan Ramon Jimenez called The Definitive Journey. A poem that they say gives this feeling, this idea that when the world goes and the world changes and the world is gone, you're still trying to be in the world you knew, but it's not really there anymore. And so they read this poem. And I will leave, but the birds will stay singing, and my garden will stay with its green tree, with its water well. Many afternoons the skies will be blue and placid, and the bells in the belfry will chime, as they are chiming this very afternoon. The people who have loved me will pass away, and the town will burst anew every year, but my spirit will always wander nostalgic in the same recondite corner of my flowery garden. And then Don Juan responds, that is the feeling Gennaro was talking about. In order to be a sorcerer, a man must be passionate. A passionate man has earthly belongings and things dear to him, if nothing else, the path where he walks. What Gennaro told you in his story is precisely that. Gennaro left his passion in Ixtlan, his home, his people, all the things he cares for, and now he wanders around in his feelings, and sometimes, as he says, he almost reaches Ixtlan. All of us have that in common. For Gennaro it's Ixtlan, for you it will be Los Angeles, for me. And then the last thing I'm going to leave you is on the last page. This is a valuable thing, I think, to leave this whole book with. It's a small 2 sentences that Don Juan is supposedly saying to Castaneda, right? Only a warrior can survive the path of knowledge, because the art of the warrior is to balance the terror of being a man with the wonder of being a man. And right there, you're giving this idea again of betweenness, of being in the middle, of walking a middle path of everything. Everything you do needs to be balanced and harmonious, 1 foot in the world, 1 foot out of the world, 1 foot in the masculine, 1 foot in the feminine, 1 foot in the yin, 1 foot in the yang, or in this case, seeing that reality in this world is terror and nightmarish and horrible, and seeing that it's wonder and full of awe and full of possibility. If you're just on one of those sides only, as it tends to be, you're out of balance. But to see both of them, and to know that both of them exist simultaneously, and it's just like a shift of the eyes to see how you're seeing the same experience or the same thing happening, fitting onto both sides of this equation. That's something that Castaneda or is being described here as being the way of the warrior, or the way of the warrior just being a description of, you might say, a person who is spiraling on their spiraling the labyrinth inward, doing something that the average person isn't doing, who's focused only on the outward, only on their own self-importance, only on looking after themselves and their needs and what they want and what they believe to be right and correct, as opposed to the warrior who's only interested in knowing who and what they are, who and what this place is, knowing as much as possible what the death experience will mean, and living what they find in the best way they know how. So that was Journey to Ixtlan. I will see if if all of you out there liked it or not. If you did enjoy the reading and you found it interesting, then I'll continue this process, and I can go through, and it'll take me time to look through the other books, of course, but I can go through some other Castaneda books for you. We'll find out if you found it valuable or not. If you think there's something interesting, yeah, by all means, pick up the book, read a bit through it. Like I say, there's a lot of chapters I like in here. There's some other chapters that are, they're just chapters. But it's an interesting read, and I never I never feel tired or drained or exhausted after reading some of these, particularly a book like this, the fourth book, Sorcerer's Explanation? No, what's the name of it? Tales of Power. A couple of books like that. I can never get, some books you read, even though they're good, and you finish reading a few chapters, and you're really tired, and you have to, not Castaneda book. These Castaneda books always give me an energetic burst when I talk about them. So it's interesting. There's something within the book itself, but you might find it different. You might find the book and you might be going to sleep. So it's all individual, right? Thanks for everything. Thanks for the support, the comments, suggestions. Lots going on, of course, in my world now, as you might know, and I'll keep you posted and updated as things here change. Stay focused on the world. We've got the next week. We're coming up on, a 20th anniversary of an event which, for a lot of us, changed our perception, changed our viewpoint, and yeah, let's see if there is a residual effect of that coming up. Beyond that, thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon. Cheers.